Good afternoon, everyone. Super excited to be here today. For those who I haven't had the pleasure of getting to know, my name is Cody Chamberlain. I'm head of product here at NetSPI, leading our product management function. I talk a lot about, really what we're doing at NetSPI is taking the best minds in offensive security, making them scalable and making them as effective as possible. I don't usually get butterflies for these, but with Ron and Chris looking at me, it's tough. Real pros. Super excited to talk today about our offensive security report, the NetSPI Vision report, really about taking a look back at the year before and then taking a look ahead, like what's going to be happening in offensive security. First and foremost, before I let Ron and Chris introduce themselves, I did want to just take a quick minute. This is a lot of work to create these things. This is a ton of data. This is a ton of cat herding internally at NetSPI. So Victoria Norris, Tori Norris, first of all, thank you so much for all your hard work. You are an absolute rock star here at NetSPI. Paul Ryan, Andy Acer, Thomas Elling, Andre Joseph, Ryan Kraus, Josh Weber, our services leaders who contributed their expertise. Thank you so much. And Nick Stang as well for the data and analytics side. Thank you so much. So today we're just going to talk about what we learned in what matters in offensive security. Like I said, I'm super excited and proud to be with these two powerhouses in cyber. So Ron and Chris, do you mind just kind of giving those few people in the world that don't know who you are some background?
Yeah, for sure. Hacker Valley Media. We started our company and really our first podcast, Hacker Valley Studio, back in 2019, and had so much fun doing it. We never stopped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm Chris Cochran, co-founder of Hacker Valley Media, also the advisory CISO at Huntress, where we focus on managed detection response for small and medium businesses. But I'm excited to dive into the report.
Awesome. So that's a good opportunity for me just to give some background as to our vision report. For those that aren't as familiar with NetSPI, decades of offensive security testing, and have a wealth of information available to us. And we certainly aren't the first to market with this type of analysis, but we really wanted to make sure that when we did it, it was impactful. We wanted to make sure that we had the right data at the right times, and we wanted it to land in a way that is effective, right? Customer outcomes are super important to us at NetSPI. So everything we do in our DNA and everything we release, whether it's thought leadership, technical expertise, blogs, stuff like that, it's all about kind of helping our clients get more done and do more. We analyzed about 300,000 findings, 250,000 hours of testing. And really what we wanted to look at was, given the different attack surfaces that our clients engage with us on, when you think of applications, mobile apps, web apps, networks from internal and external networks, and then cloud environments, what are the top 30 vulnerabilities that exist in those worlds? And then how do we leverage the expertise of those services leaders that I had mentioned before on, like, what does this mean, right? Like, why is this important? And I think a fun kind of aspect that we did is we also reached out to our community and said, what are the challenges that you're facing on breaking the cycle, right? How do you break this vulnerability management cycle and start achieving that? And prioritization was the number one challenge. So I'm going to start by asking Ron and Chris, you guys talk to a lot, you're security experts yourselves. Why is prioritization the thing that keeps popping up?
Prioritization is one of those beasts that are just hard to wrangle, right? If you had a list of alerts, and let's say that it's in order of oldest to newest, but those new ones just keep popping up, and those new ones are false positives or informational, you'll never get to the criticals, you'll never get to the highs, because you're just being reactive and reacting to all that. What happens is we get analysis paralysis. We get all of this information about all these alerts, and prioritization is really going to dictate us leveraging our time, our resources, our individuals against those really critical and high vulnerabilities. But if you don't have a mechanism to prioritize, you'll be lost. You'll prioritize the wrong things and ultimately waste time.
Yeah, I think if you look at a lot of security teams, like there's always that initial effort that you have to do when it comes to building a system to where you can prioritize. I see uh, organizations and teams really avoiding putting in that initial work because it is hard. It really demands a lot of attention and a lot of hard questions and answers. Like if this alert or piece of information did come in, how do you respond? What do you do next? And then what do you do after that? And that really gives you an understanding as to what is your priority, how urgent do you need to get that information back. But it does feel like a lot of friction. I've seen this for prioritization, but even early on when it comes to asset management, a lot of teams also avoid putting in that initial effort for that topic as well.
Yeah, no, I mean it's spot on, and a lot of times people be like, you have to find the needle in the haystack on which vulnerability. Unfortunately, it's like finding the needle in the needle stack. I say a lot of the times, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the tough thing is like I think finding a needle in a haystack would be pretty easy, right? Because you have tools, you can find a piece of metal in the haystack. But when the needle looks like all the other needles, how do you really find that one? So it really is a challenge, and a cycle we have to break for sure.
When you think about the report, I'm sure going through all that data, going through all that context, information, talking to different folks, there were probably a lot of surprises. What was some of the most surprising findings for you?
Yeah. I've said this a few times, and I keep wanting to be surprised, right? Like I keep wanting. I've been in cybersecurity for I don't know, 15 years. And I would love to be like, wow, there's this new challenge or there's this new thing. But a lot of it is just what we talk through, right? Like a lot of the same kinds of things. There's some interesting findings, say like in the mobile space around biometrics, right? As we've incorporated new technologies into the services that businesses are digitizing and offering. That's interesting, but the funny thing is a lot of the things that we have identified with the biometric kind of remediation guidance is using the APIs that Android and iOS are providing. And, there's some things, the pretty basic items that are out there. So I do my best to not be the doomsayer of cyber, right? Like,
Yeah.
like I
That's
think
good.
we've all spent a lot of years in this, and we do our best to stay really positive. And I think it's just another reminder that we really need to focus on the basics. We need to maintain the basics. It's easy for us in the industry to get really excited about new challenges and new threats. You look at adversarial AI, you look at offensive AI, you look at what happened, the kind of big spike in blockchain that has since receded a little bit. And sometimes it can take our attention. So really forcing ourselves to remind ourselves that we really do need to do those. We need to be forward looking. But there's a lot of stuff we just need to keep our eye on the ball, do the hard stuff, the nitty gritty stuff, do the work. Because this is the stuff in all reality that leads to breaches.
But AI is so cool. Everybody wants to touch it. I'm obsessed with Chat GPT, right?
Yeah.
I wonder, like, how can we focus on like the new tech, but it's still like do those foundational pieces that we see year after year after year.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good challenge to have in the context of like, but we also want to keep people engaged and we want to keep them excited, right? Like, so when you think about our security programs and we have people focused on, I think the acronym we use a lot is like the BAU stuff, right? The business as usual stuff, but finding the people that have those interests and they want to grow and they want to be a part of the new stuff is those kind of centers of excellence, or like, how do we pull the people in and bring them into this and give them exposure to that, where it's not just like, hey, go figure out AI in your silo. Right. It's how do we pull you out of these kind of BAU organizations, come together, be really rapid, really, like business focused, and put together the Chat GPT policies and this and that, and have that balance. Because not only does it allow you to meet the business demands of AI, but it keeps your team excited. It keeps your team engaged, even though, okay, I have to go back to the vuln scan and kind of do this stuff. they get a balance, right? And I think that's really important for morale and keeping people engaged and willing to come into security.
Yeah, I mean, you want to play, but you got to clean your room before you play, right? You have to make sure you don't have any public-facing S3 buckets before you start playing with ChatGPT. It's almost like you have to have that maturity model. You have to grow into that space where you can then play. You can play with the newest tech. But I think before you get there, you have to get to that 85% mark with your tech stack. You have to get to that 85% mark with your processes, with your maturity. But I think people either get bored, right? Like we're kind of talking about, or they just want to jump to that new thing. But if we really focus on the fundamentals, Ron, you talk about this all the time. If you focus on the fundamentals for an appreciable amount of time and mature your security posture, everything else is much easier. You have so much more time to play with different things. You have time to start that purple team engagement that you always been wanting to get to. But until you get there, you got to focus on what's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, for one, I might set up a call with my 4-year-old to really explain, pick up your room before you can play. Because I think any help I can get in that world. But, 85%, like that's awesome. And I love that because so many of us get caught up in the perfect. We get so caught up in like, yeah, but we won't be able to fix this one thing. So if we can't fix this one thing, we get in our own way a lot of the times when we can't solve all the problems. And I love that. And I think as an industry, it's tough because a lot of weight is on, CISOs, directors, analysts' shoulders of feeling like I can't let us get breached, right? So you have this angst and you have this, like, I can't let it. So I need to solve all the problems. And I think from leaders, depending on where your security team exists inside of your company, that might be a CIO, CTO, and the more forward-looking companies. It's like you just need to create that trust, and it's like that. It's okay. Like we can do the 85, and we're probably going to be fine.
Yeah.
Right. I love that. I absolutely love that, Chris. So as far as what you guys are seeing in the industry, I mean, you mentioned the public S3 buckets.
Yeah.
Like that's funny too. On the cloud side, I think a lot of people think cloud vulnerabilities are really bespoke too, and I think it was the number one of like sensitive data disclosure in S3 buckets. That's something that. How do you feel companies are grasping with that problem? Is it a tech problem? Like, do we just need? I probably shouldn't say this, but my new CPO came from Prisma. Do we just need Prisma everywhere, right? Like, what's your guys' take on that?
It's funny that Chris mentioned like the clean your room analogy, because I think that analogy could also be used for like doing your homework. I think a lot of times when you see something like a S3 bucket or something similar, just publicly exposed to the internet, that's not supposed to be exposed to the internet, it usually comes down to not doing your homework, not reading the documentation, not following best practices, not asking for help. That's a really big one.
Yep.
But those things of just good hygiene, like doing your homework, I think that's why we see things like S3 buckets or just really public access to sensitive information.
Yeah. No, I love that. In an AWS, GCP, Azure, like in their defense, this stuff is documented.
And there's a lot of services, like there's hundreds of services.
Right.
It could feel overwhelming to go through and read each one. But a lot of times when we take certifications, you're reading the documentation or you're reading the best practices to see what's the best way to approach taking the test and even getting hired. But I think after we get hired, after we take a new role, a lot of it can feel more like tedious or friction level work when it's really impactful to just spend some time with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly it. And, like I generally like to think of myself as a reasonably intelligent person, and it's hard, right? Like it's hard navigating all of the services, all the documentation, all the nuance. We talk about one of the findings was IAM specific, and it's just like, you think of the complexity of IAM configurations in these cloud environments, what's automatically inherited, what's cross-inherited, like it's crazy. And when you look at how fast you can create a CloudFormation template or Terraform, like how fast you can spin this stuff up, it makes absolute sense that a stupid little command line flag wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
And it's scary how fast it can go bad sometimes.
And we tend to forget, we think that everybody that's spinning up this infrastructure is like an AWS architect, right? That's not the case. Sometimes you have, security engineers that are spinning up infrastructure. Sometimes you have IT folks that also have some cybersecurity tasks that they're in charge of, but that's not their first language, right? So now they just know that they need to spin this instance up, but they don't necessarily know how to secure it. So just like Ron was saying, read the documentation, even ask help. Well, whether you're asking the provider themselves, like, hey, I want to be sure that this is what I'm trying to do. How do I do this in the most secure way possible? Or even having a conversation with colleagues, right? We don't live on an island. And I think the more that we breed this learning environment in cybersecurity, the easier it's going to be, because I think people are afraid to say, like, hey, how do I spin this S3 bucket up in the right way? Like, oh, what an idiot. But I think that the more we kind of have grace for folks and give them space to ask those questions, I think the more secure the whole internet's going to be.
100%. And it is an interesting industry we're in, where there is that sense of, I got it. It's on me. And we love that, right? Because you love that, like, really kind of mission focused person who's like, we got to figure this out. But having grace, vulnerability, right? Like, I'm much more the snowflakey, softer side of things in life, right? Like, I own it. I love it. It's just who I am. It's in my heart. And it's all about, like, creating that space, right? Like, leading by example. When people do things, say, like, yeah, that makes total sense. What a reasonable question, right? Like, this is actually really hard. And it's tough. Like, there's a lot of people in our industry who are newer, because, whatever stats we throw out that are negative unemployment rates, whatever, like, we all kind of know them. So people are in roles, right, where they're getting stretched. And that's awesome, because it builds them up as people and it gives them so much opportunity. But we also need them to know that it's okay to not know things. It's okay to not have an answer. And that doesn't make you less of a leader. It doesn't make you less valuable. It just means that this is a really hard industry and we have really hard problems to solve. So I love that, guys. I mean, it's you guys definitely have that right perspective. Folks out in the industry, all about bringing the new people into, right? You look at, like, Naomi Buckwalter on LinkedIn. I'm a huge, like, fan of Naomi. She's fantastic. And just, like, doing those things that you read some comments, you're like, ugh. It's kind of weird. But so there's some stuff out there that's frustrating, but love that you guys are doing this, championing it, that vulnerability. Like, it's not about being stupid. It's just like, this is really hard and it's really fast. And then you get the email tomorrow that's, okay, figure out AI for us.
Right.
Oh,
exactly.
okay.
On it. Yeah, let's dive into some of the findings in the report.
Yeah, so as we kind of go across the different applications, like I mentioned, we did kind of bucket them in that regard. We'll start kind of maybe by service line, but applications, it's all about function in authorization, in authentication. It's function level access, IDOR, which is, kind of fudging the query strings and the inputs on how you can interact with the platform. So on the back end, a lot of it is the same kind of thing, thinking about how are we doing authorization, how are we maximizing the functionality in maybe whatever framework. In my experience, I didn't talk much about my background, but, I was a practitioner for years. I was at, like, Target here locally in Minneapolis, and Ameriprise Financial. Those kinds of organizations are the ones that are known kind of in this forum. And, you find yourselves reinventing a lot of wheels, right? Let's invent fire. I can build fire better than the last person. And there's a lot of people who, have used fire and it works pretty well. And, when you look at frameworks, the authentication mechanisms they have, the speed to build, function level authorization really cleanly, really effectively, it's out there and it's okay to use that, right? Being able to maximize people who have kind of already solved these really hard problems so you don't have to. And in the event that you do have to solve them, really good code reviews, right? Having people look at your code, getting the code evaluated as soon as possible. Now it's more difficult because some of these do kind of require some level of human testing, right? Like there's a reason NetSPI, we've been super successful, right? Like we're really good at this type of engagement of identifying having two different credentials, logging in with those credentials, cross testing those credentials, right? Like that's really hard to do in an automated way. So finding that right balance of identifying issues sooner through code reviews and stuff like that, but still layering in some amount of human testing is vital, right? One of the things I talk about a lot is like the business logic, the authentication, authorization, session management. That's just too hard to do from a purely engineering perspective. So that's kind of on the app side. Like I said, the biometric thing was really interesting on the mobile app side, on having exposures around being vulnerable to people to kind of overtake the biometrics. So when you think of how many times you Face ID into something or fingerprint into banking, it's just like keys to the kingdom, literally. And like I said, there's a lot of good documentation out there about really effectively using the things that Apple and Google and the platforms have implemented to ensure you're able to do that. So I'll kind of stop there. I mean, like I said, none of it on the app side was super novel necessarily. But I do think it demonstrates what we've been talking about, that we just have the business as usual work to keep doing.
I'm a automation nut. And when I think of things like application vulnerabilities, I would want to automate as much as I can. I want to automate my scanning. I want to automate maybe validation that vulnerability does exist, like my scan showed it. What have been your findings? Like, is automation a great way, an okay way, not so great for finding your application vulnerabilities or even just vulnerabilities in general?
Automation's vital. I think in the industry, there's this kind of artificial bifurcation of like humans and services and product or tech, right? We can't do everything with just humans, so we're going to engineer our way out of it. And, Cody Chamberlain, not necessarily speaking as NetSPI, but I think NetSPI in general is the same kind of way of how do we use technology to maximize that value? So that to me is where automation comes in, right? How do we automate as much? How do we generate high quality, effective telemetry? But how do we pull in the right human at the right time, right? There's still a need for that intuition, that creativity, but that to me is where automation is really key, right? Like one of the items we talk about is like contextual application pen testing, where it's more focused on Nabil's just got some great thoughts that I wanted to make sure I incorporated. Thank you. Perfect. I think that automation is more than just automating, packets between machines. It's also intelligence and how we loop people in at the right time. Like human in the loop in artificial intelligence is something I've been trying to kind of incorporate more into like the idea of us is we're doing this automation. We have it there. How do we now loop in a human at the right time? Automation for automation's sake. I use this in my past. We had a project that I think we implemented Fortify to do like application code scanning, and we built the plumbing, right? Like we did it all, we got it all, we sent it all to Jira. And I was like, well, wait, what do you mean we sent it all to Jira? And they're like, yeah, we sent 25,000 defects into Jira. And I was like, oh my God, guys, like they're going to turn, and what happened is they turned off our API token into Jira. They're like, this is all nonsense, right? So automation without, that plan and operationalization, if that's a word I just made up, that's the really key. And I think that to me is where it's at. And without automation, we're going to be nowhere. We're just going to
Yeah.
have belly buttons doing things, and the people who don't, and it's going to be things they don't like doing. So how do we use automation to get rid of the crud that the humans don't like doing and really focus on the things we do?
100%. Automation is so important, especially when you're trying to get the boring, tedious stuff off your plate to do more. And I mean, it's a huge piece to that maturity concept that we were talking about earlier. How do you get more mature if you have everyone wasting their time on the small, menial stuff? But one of the findings that you all had in the report, if I remember correctly, the industry that had the lowest amount of critical and highs was insurance. And I have a hypothesis, and I would say my hypothesis is that is it because they have such a compliance culture in insurance is why they have so many boxes checked when it comes to security. Did you go into any of those findings to understand why they have less, severity incidents?
My hypothesis is the same. I think it's in our hearts, compliance does not equal security,
Right.
but compliance gets a lot of budget, which helps us do security, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the reality of it. Financials and insurance, they had a lot of the initial regulation that said thou shalt do things like pen testing, right? It was much more verbatim, where a lot of other regulatory frameworks, healthcare on the other end of the spectrum, are more about risk assessment. Now, one would argue that a key element of risk assessment is offensive security testing, stuff like that. But, that's where you get into a lot more nuance. In our, you bring up the industry, like government, nonprofit, healthcare, education are at the top three of the industries with the highest preponderance of critical issues identified. And I just want to be like really specific in like, that's not necessarily an indictment of those environments. It's just the reality of some of those, right? Like we talked about healthcare. Healthcare has patient care networks. It's a lot easier to secure networks when it's just insurance adjudication. And if it's down for a day, it's fine because you just adjudicate the claims tomorrow. When you turn off a port or you patch something in a client or a patient care network, that could be way worse, like literal life and death, right? So it's just, it's a, what's maybe not as well identified in this data set. And I think this is kind of where my head's at for the next one is, well, how do we overlay like compensating controls into this data too, to understand, maybe even though healthcare shows up as having a really high preponderance of vulnerabilities, that is maybe a good thing in that they're doing what they need to do to identify them, but they're implementing the necessary compensating controls, segmentation around those things to manage risk best without hurting anybody.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point and perspective because a lot of times a problem is only a problem when you know about it. And I would imagine like, depending on what technological systems that you have, you might not know that you're vulnerable, you have critical or high vulnerabilities in your environment. And I think another part of that is also people, right? Having the right technology in your environment, but also having the right people to implement technology or even build those policies and strategies. Did you do some research on people and types of roles and opportunities in the environment as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that was, one of the biggest kind of outcomes. And, and I talk about Naomi Bookwalter. That's what I love about her in the context of like really trying to knock down walls of getting people into cyber. I just have my notes here because I don't want to say anything incorrectly, but the barriers to timely and effective remediation. Number one, lack of resources, people. Now, how do you solve that, right? Two things: automation, technology, taking the time. I had a meeting with one of my product managers yesterday, and taking the time to enable our sales team on something is worth that time, right? We're teaching them to fish because then that might be uncomfortable because we have to kind of reallocate some aspects of the work we do, but it's worth it because long run we get more value. In investing in people taking the time to automate can be hard in the short term, but it pays dividends, Ron. Like, I'm with you 100%
Mhm.
on that. And two, really, lowering barriers to get people into it, right? Lowering
Mhm.
that, again, that angst and that it's okay to take an educated or a manageable risk on something. Good enough is good enough for now, and we'll keep iterating.
Right.
So that's probably the biggest piece of the people side. It's nothing new here that, you guys probably haven't had 30, 40, 50 conversations with folks on just the difficulty. Yeah, I've been really lucky in my career. I got started in cybersecurity when I was at an investment bank here locally in the 07, 08. So I came out of college, and then the world collapsed, and they looked around and they're like, "We need a security person. You want to do it, right?" And like, oh man, like,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it was luck, right? Now, what you
Mhm.
say, luck is for those who whatever the quotes are and do the work and
Right.
whatever.
Mhm.
But I've just, Rob Hansen is the fellow that took a chance on me, and he's a wonderful human, and really created in me that need of like, take chances on people. It's easy to get stuck in a job wreck. Like, how many of those funny things, I don't know how many of them are even true, but on LinkedIn, the memes or whatever of like the Kubernetes, we need 10 years of experience, but it's been around 8 years, like,
Exactly.
the system gets away from us. I'm in the process of hiring right now. So netspy.com/careers,
There you go.
product management of our offensive security platform. And we have another one coming. But it's, you have to have that mindset of like, we can't just get locked into these arbitrary lines of requirements. Let's take chances on people that have ambition, people that have the street cred, so to speak, of being good people who want to do the right things at the right times. And that's my soapbox, I guess. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's important. I mean, one of the data points that you all collected on was how many of the respondents are looking to hire an entry level employee over the next year, and it was about half that said no.
right.
I mean, I'd love to ask both of y'all, why do you think that is the case? I mean, I have some ideas around maybe they're afraid that they won't have time to train people, right? Because they're being very reactive, so they need people that are able to execute and continue on the mission. But that's not how we're going to grow cybersecurity as a community, right? We need to bring in these folks so that they can learn from some of the folks with more experience. But why do you think it is that people aren't reaching out to bring people from an entry level into the organization?
Yeah, I mean, just really quick, the 55% reported 5 or less roles. 71% of respondents said that less than 1/4 of roles budgeted were entry level, with 46 saying they had no plans for entry level hiring, right? And that, to me, to your point, I think you and I are really on that same wavelength of, you get stuck in month to month. I need someone to come in and just execute on this. I'm sick of dealing with SailPoint. I'm sick of dealing with this thing. I want to hire a SailPoint person to come in and do these 7 things. And there's like 4 SailPoint people out there, right? So it's like, how do you do that? And it's just, I think, a reality. Thank you, team, for getting that on there. It's going to take a lot, I think, of conversations like this, and a lot of security leaders to just say, like, it's fine. Like, we can invest in people. I was at a kind of a CISO gathering a few weeks ago, and they raised that question. Like, I train people and they leave. I train people and they leave. And we had a conversation with kind of a quasi competitor once, and we talked about our NetSPI program. If you're not familiar with NetSPI, we literally pay people for 6 months to learn how to be pen testers, and then they graduate. Not everybody does; a lot of them do, but they graduate and they deliver for us. And and they kind of mentioned, man, we do the same thing, but like, they just leave, and they don't here, right? That's not me, trying to be maybe like condescending to someone else, but it takes work. It takes concerted work. It takes understanding what's important to maybe this newer generation of people, right? I think we can all joke about snowflakes or whatever, but hey, they are who they are, right?
Right.
Let's map to that generation. Let's understand what builds them up, what makes them happy, and bring them in. But I don't know, Ron, what do you think? Are we on the same path here?
Yeah, a bit. So my perspective is a bit different, and I think it comes from like the planning aspect and also showing your leaders or your executives, your stakeholders value. A lot of times when you build your hiring plan, you don't necessarily think, okay, I'm going to need to articulate the value of someone entry level to my stakeholders. I'm asking for 3 recs this year, someone senior,
Mhm.
2 mid-level. Oh, I forgot about an intern or that entry level person. And really also asking yourself, what can that person bring to the team? I feel like entry level people are the most hungry.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're the quickest to leave because of new opportunities that arise, but I think those opportunities only exist for them because of the value that they're now able to provide. So I think having that plan to say to your stakeholders, hey, we're going to have a fourth person, not just 3. We're going to have a fourth person. That fourth person, we're going to build up. We're going to like create an opportunity immediately, but also an opportunity in the future. Because I think hiring entry level is one thing, but keeping them is a whole nother thing. And when you have that level of experience with, let's say, AWS, now your salary and your importance, your value is different. Organizations also have to respect that value and pay their people appropriately. So I think there's like that I might lose the people mentality, but also the question should really be, can I afford to pay someone of that skill set when that time is right?
That's 100%. I mean, that's something that is an unfortunate reality of kind of like the constructs of, especially in really big companies, right? Like you're in a band. There's
Yeah.
just like this fake thing we put around this person now. And it's so constraining. And, it's not uncommon for us to be like, well, if you want to make more, you got to leave and come back because the system, right? And, maybe this is the anarchists in us a little bit, Ron. Maybe we just burn the system down and rebuild it because you're right, right? And maybe that's, as I think out loud, I think you're probably right. But proactively mapping that out to your, if you're in a larger organization, to your kind of maybe HR business partner of like, we're going to bring this person in, they're going to make, X amount, but there's a life cycle here, right? There's like 2 tiers that we're going to have to do to keep them here. We may not have to go to market, right, to pay them the crazy salary that, maybe X other company is, because we're also going to layer in culture. We're going to layer in respect. We're going to layer in like those things. And those things combined, I think, equal to like how many like studies out, like the case study I did in my MBA program was all about comp. 30% or it was 70% of people who got a pay raise to stay left within 3 months anyways. Right. Like it's pays a function or a factor, but not the whole equation.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
first company I worked at was Booz Allen Hamilton, and Booz Allen, they have this matrix that's all about core competencies. It lets you know what you have to do to be considered for a promotion. And I think having something like that, almost like a rule book for, hey, how this is how you can excel,
Mm-hmm.
for organizations would get people to really be more excited about staying because not only could they get access to maybe great pay, but even access to more opportunities as they are inspired by some of their team members.
Absolutely. And, it's been a while since I've been at Target. So I don't know if it's changed. But when I was there, there was kind of the leadership expectations matrix and stuff like that. And it was the same kind of thing, right? Like these are the things we do to demonstrate our value to the organization. And it helps people self-select, right? That don't
Yep.
feel like this is the right place for them, which is a very, I would argue like the best way to get people out, like self-select. It's just not for you, right? Like move on. That's okay. So that's awesome. I'm not as familiar with Booz, but that's fantastic. I think for people to think about integrating into their kind of HR or cyber teams for sure.
Let's do one more thing, and then folks, if you have questions, be sure to drop them into the chat, and we're going to get to them here in a second. But obviously, a lot of great data in this report. Was there one fact one finding, or even one theme that you would want someone to take away from this report and use in their day-to-day work tomorrow?
I think the biggest thing is it's hard, and it's not sexy, right? It's not sexy. The work we do is in the weeds. It's asset management. It's vulnerability management. It's thankless. It's frustrating. So anything that we as an industry can do to remind each other that there is a mission, right? There's a bigger mission than all of us, because our economy, our security is so interconnected. Exposures to businesses, exposures to organizations impacts a lot of us, if not all of us, to these varying degrees. So, just keep working hard, doing the right things. I think we're getting there. I think we're turning the ship a little bit in the context of appreciating the work everyone does in this space.
Mhm.
And that's my only thing, is just to remind everybody that you're awesome and it's hard, and we at least know, right? Like, we get it. Your
Mhm.
CTO might not. Sorry, CTOs. They might forget it, but we know. And just thank you, everyone, so much for your hard work. It's not easy.
Well said.
I think there's one beautiful thing about what the report shows, especially from the top findings, is that really going back to the basics, going back to those fundamentals is what's going to lead to a lot of success. And I think for anyone that has skill or experience in cybersecurity, or even interest, just doing the fundamentals is going to take you a long way. It's going to help your organization, and it might even help you stand out as well.
100%. 100%. It's yeah, I'm trying to find another way to say it again, but you said it too well, Ron. So I totally agree.
Great. Looks like the questions and comments are flying in. So, what do you think? You think it's a good time to start bringing them up?
Start
Let's
open them
do
up. Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking through. Looks like they're having some good conversations.
it.
What threat do you feel AI poses, and how can offensive security use AI to react? When I think about artificial intelligence, hi Kelly, by the way, that was lovely to see Kelly here. Wow. So Kelly and I work together at up in Fargo. She's, I believe, still in beautiful Fargo. A phenomenal human being. Definitely the type of leader that I strive to be each day. So thank you for joining, Kelly. But when I talk about artificial intelligence, we kind of bucket it into like offensive and adversarial AI. So there's the aspects of offensive AI that make us better. Like,
Right.
how can we use things like Chat GPT to parse through large amount of data sets to find outcomes, or LLMs, I should say, not necessarily just Chat GPT. But how do we use things like AI to be better as a security team? Every organization's a little bit different. There's tougher problems. You look at like the problems Darktrace and organizations like that are solving by building effective models off of limited data sets. Like, it's really hard problems to solve, right? Like, it's easier. I'm going to get so many AI. This is so over my skis. I shouldn't even be talking about this, but it's exciting. You look at like Silence and organizations like that built these really awesome models because they had this huge wealth of data available to them to model what malware looks like. Now, when you model what an anomalic item inside of your network looks like based only on your network, it's harder, right? And how do you build those models to be really effective? But those are the ways I think that we've been incorporating AI from an offensive perspective. And the reality is, like, the adversarial AI is real, right? Like, Nabil and I had a conversation once, and he brought up just that great point of like poisoning the repositories, right? Like, these models are going out. If you can poison the data that they learn them or teach themselves on, you can control the model, right? And these are the things that we just need to be really aware of and think about more from like that threat modeling perspective, where the speed with which a lot of us are going to market with AI, we need to have that moment of like, well, wait, what are we training this on? How can people poison this? How can people impact it? Is this just public data? So that's my long-winded kind of perspective on AI. There's a lot more opportunity to effectively use it in a weaponization against attackers. I think each organization will find different ways to do that. There's a huge, you look at VC funding and stuff. Obviously, that's the world they're going after. But yeah, what do you guys think? Is there anything that I'm off track on, or you disagree with?
I don't think you're off track at all. And I'll say on the threat side, one of the things that I'm really curious and I wouldn't say nervous, but I'm definitely cautious about is I'm sure you've heard of Auto GPT, right? You give a model like one mission and it just iterates on itself, constantly trying to improve, get additional data, and provide additional output. And I could see a world in which you have these criminal actors and even nation state actors that say, hey, I need you to help me find vulnerabilities in XYZ technology. And then it's just going to go to work looking for vulnerabilities, looking for those that are vulnerable to that potential exploit. And that's what's going to really start to eat everyone's lunch, because if we're not leveraging AI to defend against it, they're just going to have leaps and bounds of leverage and advantages over us if they're leveraging something like an Auto GPT.
100%.
Yeah, super excited about AI. I think like there's threats and risks associated with it, but there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see. I've had the benefit of being able to engage with a lot of investors and stuff in the market, and this is lately, all they're talking about. So there's going to be more. Some of it will be crud,
Right.
probably a lot of it, but you're right. This is going to be game changing. And when you think about, this is a good kind of connection back to the conversation we had about doing the things we hate doing. Oh man, like what a glass half full perspective, right? Like we have these opportunities to utilize these massively efficient models to do the crap we just don't want to do. Let that do it. Let the automation do that so that we can have the humans focus on the hard stuff. But we talk about like the attacker asymmetry between, they can sit there and hack you all day and, you can only maybe re-replicate that as an offensive security team in like a 2-day engagement or whatever. And this is just going to exacerbate that asymmetry for sure. So we need to make sure we're equipped to deal with that.
Yeah, I saw this question in there earlier. It's how can security teams tactically prioritize vulnerability remediation? What are the first few steps they can take to get there? I go back to, my Marine Corps days, like the OODA loop, right? Observe, right? What's going on out there, but then what's also going on in our environment? Orient, right? What does our infrastructure, what is our environment, what does our business look like in the context of this particular vulnerability, right? You have to make a decision. Is this something we're going to act on now? Do we have to wait? Do we have to test something before we make a move? And then you take that action. But I would say you just follow that pathway, right? You just see what's going on out there and inside, orient yourself. Like, is this going to be a bad day for us if we don't do anything right now? Or is this something that isn't necessarily going to hurt us in the short term? Make that decision. Hey, we're going to put this as high priority. We're going to say, hey, let's wait a little bit. Let's wait 30 days. Or, hey, maybe we don't do anything at all. It's just an informational, just a nice to have. And then just take that action to help improve the security posture.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, there's certain things that I think security leaders are kind of re-engineering their thought process on that. And that's what made me kind of think of that when you mentioned Lowe's informationals. It's like, let's just get that out of the bucket. Like, just get it out of there. Like TLS downgrade. I get it. You're right. But it's just, it doesn't matter. And that's really the tack we're trying to take at NetSPI with like our attack surface management offering of like, how do we slide that risk slider a little bit and give you that continuous coverage, but we're really going to focus on the stuff that's bad, right? We're only going to focus on, high and critical issues. And those are the things that are scratchy. It's hard, right? Because they're like, I don't know, that one thing goes back to the 85% thing. Like, what about that one thing? So yeah, absolutely agree on that.
The only thing I'd add there is having a security policy. I think that's one tactful approach that you can take. security policy is almost like a little bit of a guideline for what the security team has the capability to do, and also what you should or should not be doing as part of your work at an organization.
Absolutely. And then having that buy-in too, having that policy embodied and championed by the CTO or the CIO as well. I worked with a fellow, Bill Frishy, who built a findings management program at a prior organization. And he is not the soft, snowflakey personality. Bill, I love you. But you're the opposite of me. But he saw the value in understanding what it meant to work across teams and building the importance of understanding it's not just an SLA that we put into service now, right? This is what this means. This is why I'm holding you accountable. It's not calling you out. I'm giving you a heads up, like from a reporting perspective, this is your name's going to be on this. This is what this means. This is who it's going to. Doing all that work ahead of time. That's something I stole from Bill that I've used a lot, is just like, all of a sudden, it's not uncommon for us to kind of not think of that. We build the ServiceNow dashboard, and all of a sudden, pow, Chris Cochran got you have 58 vulnerabilities overdue. And it's like, you didn't even tell me this was coming,
Right.
So taking that policy and then doing the things you need to do across teams to let them know what's going to happen, how it's going to impact them. And then having the CIO, CTO, or whoever understand, like, no, they did the work and we are going to hold you accountable to this. So. Yep. Absolutely good stuff. Report and put them advice on how security. Yeah, thanks, Maria, for that. I think the biggest thing is understanding that these are real, that these are exploited. These are the things that in the report, these are the things that are a function of impact and likelihood. So we are using things from the industry to inform how we do that. And, Andy and Paul and Andre, they have been doing this a long time and, and they know. So these are really impactful vulnerabilities. It's worth taking a peek at your risk registers or however you do findings management or vulnerability management to identify these kinds of things. Reach out to the people you trust, the partners, to understand from an application perspective, like what are scalable ways for us to start solving these problems. There's a lot of good organizations out there that can do that to help teach, educate, and build DNA level changes in, hey, we just added this new function. How does this fit into our authorization strategy? But that's really my take.
What I would also kind of throw on top of that is when I worked at Intel, one of the things that I loved most were reports like this. I would reach out to whoever wrote the report. In this case, it'd be NetSPI. And be like, hey, can you guys come and speak to my team? I want to help articulate the importance of vulnerability scanning this year. I want to start an initiative. Let me take the report and also the people that generated the report and have a little lunch and learn. And it's a great way to, one, build that relationship with some researchers that are doing the hard work, speaking to organizations, but also NetSPI has some great products and people. You guys do pen testing and attack surface management as well. So I think having just experts around you is a great way to get what you need for the upcoming year and prioritize.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And, connecting these, to the more incident side, right? Like Verizon's and the Red Canaries and CrowdStrike's, they all have theirs, but they have their kind of biases too, right? Of what they see. So taking the information we have, bringing that together, that's great, Ron. And great call out. We are happy to meet anytime with the folks on this call. So please reach out to myself. Let's see here. Which data points are you most interested to see in next year's analysis? That's good, Tori, that we can kind of start ideating on this. Now we got to get started on the next one. But I think really layering on year over year, we made kind of a concerted decision this year to say, let's really start with a good foundation of data. And as we build year over year, how are we trending? I think understanding a layering of more of a risk perspective of compensating controls and how people are not only managing these risks through patching, which is really kind of the perspective we got this year, but next year thinking about, okay, patching's not always something we can do. So what have we done and what things can we do to help manage these risks as well?
Hmm. Yeah, I'd love to see the point where every time this report comes out, it shifts because people are like, "Oh, we got to read this report and start checking things off." Right? I think this report's a great touchstone, or more appropriately, a good fire under the seats of the folks that are like, "Hey, we've been waiting on this thing for the last year and a half. We haven't been bit by the bug just yet. Like, let's use this as a resource to say, like, it's time to get some of this stuff shored up."
Absolutely. And for those who haven't downloaded it, I'm sure there's links all over. Be sure to download it. Reach out, netspy.com. I'm Cody Chamberlain on LinkedIn as well. Michelle Eggers, love it. Thank you so much for your hard work too, Michelle, here at NetSPI. And thanks so much for everybody that joined. I think this is maybe a good opportunity to wrap up. I personally don't have anything too much other than just to say thank you again to everybody. Ron, Chris, I'll do this anytime. Love chatting with you guys. Definitely have similar perspectives and viewpoints. So anytime you want to chat, let me know. I'll kick our CEO and use his fancy office. I did my best to have a good area, but I got to get out of here pretty soon.
I hear you. No, thanks for having us on. Really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining.
Yep. Thank you. Let's keep it going. Let's do it again.